I think it's very easy when you get to know somebody to have empathy for their situation. And I wonder, like, well, what's the percentage of people that are diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder for whom there are very good reasons for the behavior, where the behavior in their world becomes adaptive? Welcome back to another episode of Shrink Space. Rob, I'm happy that you're willing to still meet with me after the last week.
It was a decision point for me, but I think I was more curious to feel what it would be like to talk to the most hated man in America. So, for just a little context, our last episode, Dave and I started it by playing a part. Each of us played a part in our reaction to the presidential debate, where Dave played the role of a staunch Trump defender, and I played the role of a staunch Kamala Harris defender. It appears, Dave, that some people struggled to get through the first 5 or so minutes of the podcast. At least it appears through our comment section of our YouTube channel that they struggled to get through. And the result was a resoundingly negative experience of you. You almost got quasi-canceled, I feel like.
Sadly, it's not the first time that I've been quasi-canceled. Let me first say, Rob reaches out to me, sees the comments, and he reaches out and he goes, "Oh, you're getting lit up." And Rob, I've never seen more joy in Rob than seeing me get annihilated in the comments.
I've been smiling for a week. My jaws hurt.
And I go, "Rob, I'm a professional. Okay, this doesn't bother me at all. No big deal. You don't ever respond to the commenters." And then I think it made it like 3 hours, and then I had a freak out, and I had yelled at everybody in the comments. But I cannot keep up with them. I've tagged comments. Please listen to more than 5 minutes of this thing. No can do.
Right. And I guess to come to others' defense, what I've heard even from people in my personal life who listen to us, like understanding what we were trying to do, I did hear a number of times, like, yeah, it wasn't all that clear. So even for people who listened to the whole thing, like we never did actually tie it up to say what we're trying to do is demonstrate what naive realism looks like. So while it may have made sense to us at the time, there were more than just people who watched and commented and maybe didn't make it through the first 2 or 3 minutes that I think struggled to understand what we're trying to do.
No, you and I are in very different places with this. Okay,
are you not ready to talk about this yet? Are you still at a heightened level?
I am not ready to make any kind of concession. Okay, I'm pissed, and I want a personal apology from everybody in the comment section. All right.
My personal favorite was I got a text message from my cousin, like the day after this aired. It was like at 11 p.m. And he's like, who is this guy you've decided to do a podcast with? What is going on with him? And I asked him, like, "Oh, you listened to the whole thing?" And he's like, "No, I just started." And so it was a good preview of the torrent of experiences and comments to come. So
I'm trying to regulate my emotions and just be, I accept all of the feedback, positive and negative, and I appreciate all of the viewers. Let's go ahead. I don't mind it at all if you listen to 5 minutes of content and then want to tell me that I'm a horrible psychologist and that I'm totally incompetent and it's like and by the way, the whole episode was about bias. Okay. Maybe some people were not as thoughtful as they should have been.
And I also don't mind that you've done this either. So I think it's a win-win. You don't mind. I don't mind. Fantastic for me. So I appreciate it all around to you for your reaction and for others for allowing you to have that reaction.
Yeah, there we go.
So Dave, I guess I'd like to hear from you. How do we plan on confusing our listeners this week?
We're doing a little bit. Topic? I'm going to be a little bit more directive this time. This time we're talking about Diddy. And let me frame this way by saying,
oh God. Yeah, we're going to go something a lot more like milquetoast than the election. We're going to talk about Diddy this week. That makes a lot of sense.
But let me be clear for the audience. Neither Rob nor I are pro Diddy.
End of sentence.
End of sentence. We're not pro Diddy. But I did want to talk about Diddy because I think it is my journey with Diddy has been one where when I was in high school, I thought he was unbelievably cool.
Puff Daddy in the Family, No Way Out, the edited version, of course, because my parents bought it for me, was the first CD I ever owned. That he goes way back for me.
I was always sort of a fan, and more than a fan, I always wanted to go to his parties, these white parties that he had, everybody dressed up in white. And I was like, I would it must be just absolute chaos and fun and excitement.
Right. Yeah. Like he's like a mogul. Right. And so he was known for, those parties, for being very successful, for, not only in his own right, but supporting other artists, at least from what I could tell.
Yes. So the guy that was the D, the I, the D, the Y, it's Diddy, that guy.
Yes, please do more of that. I think you're going to have more negative comments about that attempt to rap than anything else.
He has been charged with, I'm going to read this to you, the following: racketeering, which is like typically what is reserved for, like mobsters. It's organized crime, criminal enterprise, fraud, extortion, drug trafficking, bribery, all that. Sex trafficking, and then this is interesting to me, transportation to engage in prostitution, which sounds a lot like sex trafficking, but apparently those are two separate charges.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means.
But the bottom line is, not a good guy.
I mean, I'd say he sounds like a lot more than a bad person. And I know that you will likely see this or be able to define this differently than I. You're a counseling psychologist, which means you've had a lot more experience historically working with clinical populations and folks with mental health disorders. That as an organizational psychologist and someone who works with people, teams, and organizations, I don't have that exposure. But I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, to me, he sounds like a friggin' psychopath.
Fair. And I see how you got there.
Okay.
Now, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I think the term I think it's important to talk about the term psychopath, but I first want to mention that the purpose of this podcast is entertainment. We are not doling out medical advice here. This is not therapy. And you and I can't make diagnoses from afar. If we've never met somebody, we can't diagnose them. So we're not diagnosing Diddy. But we were talking about a situation like this based on the symptoms that are being shown in the media. How would we think about something like this?
Right.
So the term psychopath is interesting because it's very common in popular culture, but it's not actually a diagnosis that a psychologist would give.
Right.
The diagnosis that a psychologist would give would be antisocial personality disorder.
Okay.
And our kind of Bible for categorizing all of our diagnoses is called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And the DSM gives a very clear, I shouldn't say that. They're very clear about what sort of metrics need to be met in order to meet the diagnostic criteria. But I think that those specific behaviors are really vague. So let me read this to you and let me know what you think, okay?
Okay.
So in order to meet the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder, you have to have three of the following. Okay. You have to, one of them is you're not conforming with social norms. You're not following laws, right? You're getting arrested, those kinds of things. Deceitfulness, you have repeated lying. You're using aliases. You're conning people for your own profit.
Okay.
You are impulsive or you have a failure to plan. You're irritable, you're aggressive, you might be getting in fights, assaulting people. You have the reckless disregard for the safety of others. You're consistently irresponsible, unable to show up at work on time, not meeting your financial obligations, and you have or you have a lack of remorse, indifference to having hurt other people. So of those 7 things, you just have to have 3,
right?
And you meet the diagnostic criteria. So if I just listed that to you, does that fit Diddy to you?
I think so. At least, again, given what has come out in the media about the charges leveled against him, I guess the other thing I would say is, as I listen to some of that, some of those descriptors sound pretty broad.
Yeah.
Like, like I feel like I'm irritable.
That's right.
At the same point in time, I've been irritable. I've not wanted to listen to what people had to say. I probably at some point in time have met the diagnostic criteria as a layperson like me would hear that. So I don't know. I mean, does that make sense to you? Like, how is this different?
I think this is one of the main challenges when it comes to diagnosing personality disorders is because sort of by definition, it's vague. And, so the way that we get around it is by saying that typically you want these behaviors to be present in different areas of your life.
Okay.
So for example, if you have really crappy relationships, but it's just your romantic relationships and things are great at work and things are great with your kids and right, then it's like, it's not a pervasive pattern. A personality disorder is a pervasive pattern
across different parts of who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. These, for someone to get this diagnosis, you're probably going to see it in many different contexts.
Right.
The other thing that's important with antisocial is that they have to be over the age of 18, but the symptoms that I just listed have to have been present before the age of 15.
Okay.
So essentially this is the follow-on to a childhood disorder called conduct disorder.
Okay.
So if you've ever seen in the movies, like there's that movie with Macaulay Culkin, The Good Son.
The Good Son. Yep.
Right. He had conduct disorder, which if he maintained those behaviors until he's an adult, it now becomes antisocial personality disorder.
As a quick side note, I remember as a kid, of course, loving Macaulay Culkin because of Home Alone.
Yes.
And then watching commercials and I never saw the movie, but I remember the only line, I guess it was from the trailer, but he's like holding, have you seen the movie?
Which, The Good Son?
The Good Son, yeah.
No, I was too afraid to watch it.
Okay. Well, I was like, 8, so I wasn't going to watch it, but I think there's a line in there where he's like holding some kid up from like falling down, and he says something like, "If I let you go, do you think you could fly?" And I'm like, this is going to be kind of a fun, it's like in Home Alone when he's dangling off the end of the treehouse. Like, this should be a fun thing. I'm like, "Hey, Mom, I want to go see The Good Son." And she's like, "What the fuck? Like, what the hell did you do?" So anyway, this is a diversion, but whoever his agent was, who was like, "Hey, Macaulay, you have a good thing going with Home Alone, but we want you to divert to The Good Son about a kid with conduct disorder and then go back to Home Alone."
Yeah, he was showing his range as an actor.
Anyway.
So here's why I wanted to talk about this is I am not convinced that antisocial personality disorder is as common as we think it is. So yes, when you look at somebody like Diddy and you see these horrific behaviors, that's the extreme example. And I think it's very easy for everybody to go, hey, there's a very clear diagnosis here. Right. But I would say in popular culture, the term psychopath is used pretty frequently. And there's a large range of, with all of these things that we just described here, deceitfulness, impulsivity, irritability, there's a spectrum on which all of those show up. And so it becomes very easy for people to say, hey, I see you doing all of those things, to your point. Right. And so it's like, how common is this?
And I would say, I think that this is something, I mean, you and I have talked about before, that there's just a broad prevalence of psychology and psychologically related terms in the culture. It's not just now, it's always been the case. I mean, I think I said the word crazy before. I don't know if crazy was ever like a formal term that people used, right? Or insane or something like that. So it's normal that these words permeate, one, kind of specific area to a broader culture. But it reminds me of what you and I have talked about before with terms like toxic and narcissist and, those terms that are widely used now. And whereas psychologists, we might have viewed them differently. More specifically, and now they're more widely used. I think a term like being a psycho or a psychopath is widely used, but it sounds like, again, there is a more specific usage for it, and maybe not for that term specifically, but for antisocial personality disorder. Yeah.
So if you think about antisocial personality disorder as described by the DSM, I almost think that it doesn't exist except for in these very extreme cases. And let me make that argument to you. You let me know if you think that I'm right or not. Okay.
That it doesn't exist.
It almost doesn't exist.
Okay.
So right now, the prevalence in the DSM, they say it's between 1% and 4%. I think 4% is a wild overestimation. And I even think that 1% is a wild overestimation.
Okay.
And I'm going to make that, that's what I'd like to do is I'd like to argue with you about whether or not we should think about antisocial personality disorder differently. So let me say it this way. So I used to work at a community mental health center. So when I first started off being a therapist, and one of my very first clients was this woman who had gotten out of jail for abusing her kids.
Okay.
So she comes into the clinic and we're sitting there and I go like, whatever, doing like a background kind of global interview.
Okay.
And she's talking about what she went to jail for. And what she went to jail for was not feeding her children. And I asked the question, why did you not feed your children? Why were you neglecting them that way? Like she would get herself dinner and then not get them dinner.
Okay. So she would feed herself.
Eat right in front of them. And she's got like a 3-year-old, young kids. Okay. And I said like, well, how could you possibly, I didn't say how could you possibly, but I, as a beginning therapist, was totally overwhelmed and was like, well, how could you do that? And the answer was they need to learn how to take care of themselves. I learned how to take care of myself and I'm just fine. I survived. They can survive.
Right.
And it changed my perspective because I didn't find her to be a ruthless person, but I found her to be a very damaged person, someone who had been
circumstance
totally traumatized. Yeah. And in her world, she felt like that was adaptive. It wasn't like I'm trying to hurt my kid. It was like, this is what life looks like. And so she didn't take care of her children. And she was constantly stealing from Target. She would steal from Target and sell the clothes on her block. She would engage in many of these behaviors. But it's like I guess I would say this. I think it's very easy when you get to know somebody to have empathy for their situation.
Sure.
And I wonder, like, well, what's the percentage of people that are diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder for whom there are very good reasons for the behavior, where the behavior in their world becomes adaptive?
Well, I mean, it makes me think, like, so you said, she wasn't trying to like starve her kids. She was just thinking, well, they had to learn, like I did, how to take care of themselves. But in these diagnoses, does the intent matter? That
I think is that's the key question. Does it matter that there is a potential reason for the behavior?
Any behavior, there could be, not any, but with almost any behavior, there's a reason why I might yell at my kid because they didn't put their, they didn't put their toys away. But then, 10 years later, all they can remember is how I yelled at them all the time. They don't remember anything else about their interactions with me. So they're going to talk to their therapist about how their dad was an asshole. But my intent isn't to be an asshole. My intent was to have them put their shit away. But does that matter?
I do think it matters.
Okay.
I think I'm going to make the argument that it matters.
All right.
But
we may disagree, but I'll wait. I'll reserve judgment.
Let me convince you. I'm going to shift the diagnosis away from antisocial to PTSD.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
When you look at PTSD, someone comes back, in particular, let's just call it returning from, being deployed in the military. Someone has PTSD. If you look at the symptoms of that, you're looking at things like hypervigilance. You're looking at flashbacks. You're looking at avoidance of stimulation that reminds them of the event. You're looking at incredible global anxiety and distress. Yep. You're like this sort of agitated state, right?
Yep.
If you look at all the diagnostic criteria, hypervigilance, for example, is a very valuable trait.
Right.
If you're in battle, if you're in combat, you want to be hypervigilant. You don't want to sleep well. You want to avoid things that are stressful. We are building people to walk through the world in a more skittish way because that's how they stay alive. And then they return stateside and we look at those symptoms and we go, you have PTSD. Right. And so if I look at the same kind of, so then I go, okay, is it really PTSD or is is it something else? Like, is this a pathology that's a problem, or is it something else?
Yeah. I mean, so then in that situation, or in that example, in situation A, it's not a pathology. It's a way you behave in order to stay alive. Situation B, it could be a pathology because it prevents you from living a normal life.
And so I wonder, is it the same thing with antisocial personality disorder? You come from a place where, I mean, I do believe that I could create antisocial personality disorder in my kids.
Yeah, there's some heritability, or right, it can be biological. I can imagine most of these disorders are.
It's like 40 to 50% biological or hereditary.
But like most things, right, there's also some sort of situational factor.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what you're saying is you think you could, should you decide to behave that way, you could
as a fun little experiment.
Yeah. Hopefully your kids and wife are listening. Yeah.
I think I could create that. And so I could make it so that it is adaptive for my kids to be fucking ruthless.
Right.
In my house, to survive, you've got to be ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I just wonder, I understand the argument that there is a collection of behaviors which makes them, right, the behavior is what matters. Who cares why you have it? If your collection of behaviors matches up with the diagnostic criteria, you have it. But I guess I would argue that it doesn't add value.
I disagree. I disagree for two reasons. One is, even with your PTSD example, in situation B, when you're not in combat, not only is it negatively affecting others, that hypervigilance, whatever else it is, it's affecting you and your quality of life. So I guess that's why it matters, as I think about it, is, I mean, it could be adaptive, but that woman that you talked about, that example you gave, I mean, her quality of life, I think, was objectively not that great, it sounds like.
Yeah. Nightmare. Absolutely nightmare.
And so in other words, knowing some of this does matter, because it can hopefully help. If you know this, then you're able to get help, and you hopefully have a better quality of life. Like, I think that's the thought that's going through my head here, is it's important to know some of this because you can then do something about it if you know this.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're right, I guess. But I believe that especially with antisocial personality disorder, that the diagnostic, like meeting that diagnostic criteria, I think we sort of just go, well, we're going to lock you away and throw away the key, right? Like they'd say like 50 to 70% people, 50 to 70% of the people in jail have antisocial personality disorder, which seems outrageous to me, right? It just, it's like,
if the prevalence is 1 to 4% in the population, and it's what 15, 20 times that, or yeah.
Right. In jail, it just feels like it leads us, I think, not to want to treat it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's maybe why where there's the rub. Like I look at someone like Diddy and I think, I don't want to treat him. Right. But then I look at, and maybe this is just bias on my part, but I look at people where I can sort of see what happened and why they're showing up the way they're showing up. And I'm going like, man, I don't know that you're a bad person. Cause I think maybe that's my issue, is I hear antisocial personality disorder and my assumption is bad person, lost cause, they're the problem, get them out of here.
Yeah, maybe that's where I don't understand is that how most of those folks who are viewed, is like, hey, if you're diagnosed with this, you're viewed as a lost cause, like throw away the key, stick them in jail, they're done.
That's my understanding. I don't work in the corrections industry, so maybe not, but my sense is like, if you think about how our sort of correctional facilities operate, the treatment is we're going to lock you up. And if you're poorly behaved, we're going to lock you up for longer. But it's like, if we acknowledge what causes these symptoms, the trauma treatment would be the solution, or at least that would be the treatment. Like that should be a critical component of someone's time incarcerated, when they're incarcerated.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe where you and I certainly will agree is, I mean, incarceration, prison is not treatment. It's punishment. My sense is, we don't have prison in the United States to rehabilitate anyone. There may be programs that are there now, that help do that. But, I think in general, we've decided that, prison is there for punishment, or to remove people from the streets, as they say.
And if you think about the diagnostic makeup of someone that has that label, punishing them is not going to make somebody change their stripes, right? You're not dealing with the root of the problem at all, sort of doubling down on the trauma they've already experienced.
But your assumption there is that society's goal is to rehabilitate them.
Yeah.
I think you'd find a large faction of people who would say, I don't care.
Yeah. And that's as I'm saying it, I'm thinking maybe I'm in that bucket too.
That you don't care?
I care, but I also go, I think that's like the philosophical debate is, if the goal as a psychologist, I think that, or as the field of psychology in general, our orientation is always towards how do we protect people?
Right.
And then in that case, yeah, then we should be trying to rehabilitate everybody, and they should all be getting, EMDR and getting trauma treatment. And we should all be trying to do whatever we can to help this person work through their past. But then if I'm looking at like, I got to run a functioning society, maybe we just go, you know what, you hit the diagnostic criteria, you have the symptoms, and you're now a cancer, and we're going to just cut you out.
Right. And again, it's easy for someone like you and like me and you and I to talk about this, but I think this is where I go back to, yeah, it is easier. I think that's why we have, at least as a Western country, don't we have some of the highest rates of incarceration? I feel like I've heard that somewhere.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah, okay. So
let's count it as a fact.
As a fact, yes. But I think there is, there is I think the part of me that got into psychology in the first place that says no, like that's not the solution to a problem, because then it's going to continue to repeat itself. With a lot of these types of disorders, I think the hard work, but the work that makes more sense to me as a psychologist, is you have to fix the issue so that the issue doesn't happen anymore. And jail and putting these people in prison, that's not the fix.
I think you're 100% right, and I'm annoyed with myself in this topic, because I feel I have a hard time agreeing with you, and I have a hard time being on the soft, ethical side of things. You know what I mean? I want to be a little bit like, you know what?
You want to be oppositional.
Yeah, I want to be oppositional, but I think you're right. I think your snowflake approach in this case is right.
All right, so I won yet again.
Again.
What I heard. Okay.
Now, if you think Rob didn't win, you can check us out. Leave comments on all of our social media, which is at ShrinkSpaceShow. And that is the same tag or handle, whether or not it's at TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube Shorts. Or sorry, Facebook and YouTube Shorts.
And I made a call to action to everyone last week to provide all their positive comments from our last episode to me and all their negative comments about what they didn't like to Dave. I just want to thank everyone for having done that. It was a resounding success, at least from my perspective. So I would continue to encourage you all to provide comments about this show in the comment section wherever you find us. If you have ideas, suggestions, or feedback that you'd like to email, you can please feel free to do that at shrinkspaceshow@gmail.com.
Perfect. Remember to hit the notification bell, like, subscribe, all those things. Or either Rob or I could be a psychopath and hunt you down. Is that a fair way to close it out?
I don't think so.
Okay, never mind. We won't. But I have been traumatized, and you know what happens after someone's been traumatized? They can be very reactive and impulsive. So you better like and subscribe.